Hey, so I wanted to start up something different today. I have here with me the Iliad, a book that is very dear to me, and I just want to share the fondness I have for it. Because I worry that there's a barrier to entry with older things like this. It's not that they're hard to find, obviously, Homer is ubiquitous, but rather hard to find pleasure in. I'm sure you've met someone who says that their favorite movie is Citizen Kane, or their favorite comedian is Lenny Bruce. And as you know, those people are just lying. People become aware of the historical importance of something and act like they enjoy it in the same way that they enjoy contemporary things. And I'm not playing that game. With these traditioned, very old things, we really can't enjoy them as they were meant to be enjoyed in their own day. I do think, though, that there's nonetheless value in whatever it is that has let them persist through time, and also a certain newfound joy in the accessing of the tradition itself. And so, what I'd like to do is just invite anyone who may come across this to read through some of this book with me. What I'll be doing, more so really than reading, is giving some context and background, explaining things, and doing my best to sort of bridge that gap in sensibility between an ancient epic and the modern world. And I am aware that there's no dearth of things like this out there. You can go on YouTube and retrieve any number of summaries, explanations, guides, introductions, and what have you for the Iliad, but my problem is that most of them that are accessible and friendly for people who aren't already familiar with the text fall into one of two categories. They're either sort of exam-based, which is to say they exist to help you pass a test when you're reading in a classroom, rather than enjoying the book on a person's own accord. And that's fine if that's your purpose. But I'm going more towards someone who is reading at leisure for pleasure. And the other direction they may go is sort of hyper-modernization, where a lot of background about the world the story is in is lost, and a lot of cute shit is injected. You may know what I'm talking about. I don't want to say that it's necessarily a feminine tone, but they have kind of a teen feel. They try to, excuse me, analogize a lot of with a lot of slang or memes, and it's not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not mad at the attempt to make it accessible, and I'm trying to do the same thing here. But the tone they have is kind of a turnoff for me. It's usually sort of infantilizing, I'd say. So what I want to do is just make an unpretentious, not academically bound, and not anime or Marvel movie style guide to the Iliad for anyone who might be interested. Because the story is really great and a lot of fun. But I know it can seem, and probably just initially is, boring and kind of pointless if you don't have the same prerequisites that a lot of readers in ancient Greece would have had. So I'm attempting to give you that as we read. I have two translations here with me. The one by Robert Fitzgerald, right here, and another one by Samuel Butler. Now, any translation you have is fine, obviously. They're the same text, and the differences are very minor. They just constitute certain decisions that are made with things like word choice, proper names, phrasing, and whether to present it as more of a poem or a prose story. And again, any translation is good, but if you're looking to pick up a copy, I would suggest Fitzgerald here. Probably not more than $5, just get a used paperback. And what I like about Fitzgerald is that he does present it more poetically. The Iliad is, of course, a very long poem, and is written conforming to a meter, namely dactylic hexameter, and suffice to say, a specific rhythm. And also a poem. As a poem, it's meant to be more sung than spoken. And Fitzgerald manages, despite the change of language and the fact that no one will be singing this, somehow to preserve some of that musicality. So if you can, I would pick up Fitzgerald's translation. And my further recommendation is that Butler here has a very paragraph-based, easy-to-understand prose translation. It's an older translation, 1898, I think, And by virtue of that, is available everywhere. Just Google Samuel Butler Iliad, and you'll have 100 websites with the full text totally free. So you can read your book in your hands, Fitzgerald, to get a feeling of the poem. But if ever that poetic vagueness is too much, or if you get thrown off by his sort of Greek affected transliterations or literal phrase translations, then keep a browser tab open and consult the corresponding passage in Butler to find some anchorage in his more straightforward prose rendition. I will probably end up popping back and forth a bit between these two for reading here, just due to maybe certain passages I like better in one place or another, or because one may better illustrate what we're focusing on at a certain time. And I will try to keep talking about the actual Greek to a minimum. I do kind of need to at the beginning especially, but this is still going to be a beginner-friendly and introductory experience. So we will begin. Typically, the practice in talking about a text is to offer some background context, then look at the words as they stand on the page, and then analyze the themes. However, in this instance, I find it helpful to do these things in reverse, as it just so happens that the biggest theme of the book is its own very first word. The first line reads, Meinin aede thea peleiadeo Achilleos ulomeinin. That meinin there at the beginning is anger or wrath or rage. And remember, regardless of your copy by whichever translator in whatever language, as prosy as it may read, the Iliad is poetry. It's a song. Its words and their placement are intentional. They conform to a meter, have musicality, and also power. And putting meinin right at the very beginning is a powerful and intentional move. Butler's more kind of true to English prose translation is Sing, O goddess, the anger of Achilles. And that's an accurate representation of what is said. What I miss, though, is that flourish on the opening word anger. And that's where Fitzgerald excels with his opening line. Anger, be now your song, immortal one. I don't really care for the immortal one business. I think that, goddess is probably the best way to render thea. But the word anger at the beginning is the takeaway here. It's what I love so much. And in Greek, you can hardly hold the word back. Meinin. It practically emanates out, which is lovely considering what is going on in the story. We are in narration, the setup, the once upon a time part of the story. The way you would have heard the story back in the day is you'd be gathered around, let's say on a winter's evening in Greece, the time most conducive in that world for long stories, and your bard, your poet, storyteller, somebody who has seen his fair share of traveling, and someone for whom the world is wide, someone who, rather than hearing and being enthralled by songs, is meticulously focused on the set of unwritten and likely unnamed roles to which these songs and stories conform. Without the fancy language to describe them, he is still aware of the meter, music, the rhythm, the alliteration, and wields all of these as tools to accomplish the humanly impossible. A memorization, remember, sans, without writing it down, a memorization and performance of 15,000 lines. And I really do mean humanly impossible. Greeks of the time did believe that this was an undertaking too great for a human to suffer. You see, they didn't think of these various poetic devices as mnemonic devices, but rather they envisioned the poetry that they undertook as divine possession. That's the goddess named in the first line, the muse. Epic poetry would start with an invocation of the muse, asking the goddess to speak through the poet, endowing him, for the duration of the performance, with the divine power of the song. And the question of what is the song about is meinin, the anger, wrath, rage of Achilles, and just what that spelled. And so, reading on from Butler, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus, that brought countless ills upon the Achaeans, Many a brave soul did it send hurrying down to Hades, and many a hero did it yield a prey to dogs and vultures. For so were the counsels of Jove fulfilled from the day on which the son of Atreus, king of men, and great Achilles, first fell out with one another. So there you have a pretty grim forecast laid out. Obviously, the anger, however it manifests, will lead to the deaths of many people. And don't just brush past any of the imagery. It's not just that these people are dying, but they become a prey to dogs and vultures, which is to say that these deaths are dishonorable in a way, so unnecessary and unjustly dealt out that the bodies are deprived from a proper burial, the surviving families and friends deprived of their funeral. Death is part of life, and all the more in times of war, but even in war there is an understanding that if a death can be avoided, it ought to be. And even those who have died deserve at the least their bodies let to their kinsmen to bury and for all of the funeral rites to be performed. And the widespread carnage described is interestingly contrasted with some very individual matters. You have the anger of one man, Achilles, our hero, and the other mortal mentioned, the son of Atreus, is Agamemnon, whom the audience would know to be a king, and he is here the commander of the Greeks. That is, of course, the team Achilles is on in the conflict we're in, the Trojan War. But don't let all of that context trip you up. The words as they stand on the page are that two men fell out with each other. And the ripples from this two-person conflict led to countless deaths. And remember, we're still in the first few lines, so by primacy, this is really meant to stand out. And it gives a harrowing glance of how, when you're dealing with people in power, so many people can be affected and even die from what is, again, an interpersonal quarrel. And whether you would consider it a heroic strong will or just an arrogant selfishness, the idea of will is one that Homer is very interested in. Specifically, sort of top-down will, or how the whims of the mighty can magnify upon normal people. And not just naturally through tyranny or politics, but supernaturally. Butler called it the counsel of Zeus. I like Fitzgerald's will of Zeus better. The Greek is boule, which is like will or determination. And that's what's being fulfilled from this conflict throughout the events of the story. Basically, the will of God is the plot. And exactly what that means is something to chew on, whether it implies a firmly divine top-down world where the quarrels of gods define reality as they are reflected in mortal strife, whether we fight here on earth and gods fight on Olympus with occasional crossovers and crossfire, or whether the goings-on of Olympus are just personifications of the irrational hatreds and loves that people experience. It's not something I have an answer to, but it is a good and interesting sort of philosophical question to keep in your head as we read about the conflicts here that are both mundane and divine. And speaking of the divine, the text continues with the question, among the gods, who brought this quarrel on? It answers, the son of Zeus by Leto, whom the audience understands to be Apollo. Agamemnon angered him, so he made a burning plague of wind rise in the army. Rank and file sickened and died for the ill their chief had done in despising a man of prayer. So Apollo has sent a plague upon the Greek troops. This because Agamemnon, who will soon have the falling out with Achilles, has insulted Apollo by despising a man of prayer, or acting unjustly to a holy priest of Apollo. This priest, Chryses, had come down to the ships with gifts, no end of ransom for his daughter. On a golden staff he carried the gods' white bands and sued for grace from the men of all Achaia, the two Atreidai most of all. So Chryses is a priest to Apollo, and to insult the priest of a god is to insult the god, which Agamemnon has achieved by capturing the priest's daughter. And Chryses even went before the Greeks and offered a handsome ransom for the return of his daughter. I think that note is kind of interesting because it illustrates that the captivity by itself, the kidnapping of the girl in the first place may not necessarily be so egregious. This sort of thing, unfortunately, happened a lot in this time and place. But the fact that this man, this holy man, offered a fair, even a generous ransom for the girl and then was rejected is the unjust part. I draw attention to this now because it's a necessary component of this worldview, and we needed to understand things like Apollo's reaction now and Achilles' reaction later. In this world, women are objectified, again, also more in times of war, in two meaningful ways. One, just that they are spoils of war that go to a victor, right? There are prizes. And two, they have prices, some quantifiable worth that overrides any kind of sentimental value. This price was, met and offered by Chryses to the Atreidai. And Atreidai just means son of Atreus, and that would be Agamemnon, the leader of our Greeks, and his brother Menelaus, who another leader of Greeks who is the husband of Helen of Troy. And they are the reason this whole war started, of course. Yeah, and that price was rejected, and that's the bad part. It continues, O captains Menelaus and Agamemnon, and you other Achaeans under arms. The gods who hold Olympus, may they grant you plunder of Priam's town and a fair wind home. But let me have my daughter back for ransom, as you revere Apollo, son of Zeus. Those are the words of Chryses. Again, he comes in farewell to the Greeks. Even benedicts their plundering of the town, only asks for his daughter, invoking the name of Apollo to do so. Then all soldiers murmured their assent. Behave well to the priest, and take the ransom. So the majority of people here are on the same page. Whether, they say this because they want to avoid divine wrath, or they hope for some portion of that ransom, or they just want to do right by a pious man, who's to say. But the soldiers want to give the girl back. However, as comes up very often in the Iliad, the will of the many is often irrelevant. What matters and what gets realized is the will of the few, the elite. So would Agamemnon satisfy the majority by trading away his prize? Agamemnon would not. It went against his desire, and brutally he ordered the man away. Let me not find you here by the longships, loitering this time or returning later. Old man, if I do, the staff and ribbons of the god will fail you. Give up the girl. I swear she will grow old, and home in Argos, far from her own country, working at my loom, visiting my bed. Leave me in peace and go while you can in safety. So harsh was he that the old man feared and obeyed him, in silence trailing away, by the shore of the tumbling, clamorous, whispering sea, and he prayed and prayed again, as he withdrew, to the god whom silken, braided Leto bore. And that's Chryses walking away, scorned and praying to Apollo. As I'm sure you've noticed, people are often referred to by the name of their parents. Typically it's patronymic, but with Zeus's progeny being pretty wide, they use Apollo's mother, Leto, to describe him. Just narrows it down a bit more. And what follows now is that prayer to Apollo, Chryses' prayer to Apollo, to enact vengeance upon the Greeks for their injustice to him. O hear me, master of the silver bow, protector of Tenedos and the holy towns, Apollo, Sminthean, if to your liking, ever in any grove I roved a shrine, or burnt thy bones and fat upon your altar, bullock or goat flesh, let my wish come true, your arrows on the Danaans for my tears. Danaans just means Greeks. It's kind of the same as Achaeans here. There is a difference, but it's for this purpose, it's irrelevant. And this prayer is interesting because it illustrates a lot about religion. It's both a glimpse at some religious practices, the likes of which a priest would undertake, and also like a little trove of epithets for Apollo. Protector of Tenedos and the holy towns. And Butler even names these towns. O God, that protectest Chrysae, and holy Kela, and rulest Tenedos. These are all local towns, islands in the Aegean Sea near Troy. Our Greek heroes being, away from home and making their way towards Troy. These towns all pay special reverence to Apollo and are thought to be, therefore, under his protection. The idea of a patron deity over a city comes up a bit, and it was a very real way that polytheism worked in the ancient world. Sminthean is a really interesting name for Apollo. Sminteu, it means mouse god, in the capacity of mice being sort of a pestilence. Think you're farming and fucking mice are ruining your crops. And this is neat to understand who Apollo was at the time. I think a lot of our modern notions of Apollo are centered around him being like a vaguely solar deity with an affinity for music. Maybe you think of kind of Nietzschean Apollonianism in the sense of like orderliness. But the ancient world understood him to be a force, that would summon plagues. And in the region of the Troad in particular, which is to say the area around Troy, the setting, sort of modern Turkey in the west of that, he was thought of in this pestilent capacity. Here we get mouse god, and there's record elsewhere in the same region of the epithet locust god. So Apollo is a figure who is both dear to the region and locally understood to have a very destructive capacity. We also see some of what it meant to venerate a god. Chryses references building shrines and making burnt offerings. And many sacrifices would be these burnt offerings. You can imagine just the religious imagery from doing this. Meat is obviously a valuable thing to be letting go of. And when you burn it, there almost seems to be a loss of matter occurring. You're left with this ash, and you watch, the smoke rise up into the air, almost as though you're sending it to gods on high. So in return for all his service to Apollo, Chryses asks him, Apollo, who is visualized as sort of an archer, to loose his arrows of plague and pestilence down on the infidel Greeks. Now, when he heard this prayer, Poibos Apollo walked with storm in his heart from Olympus's crest, quiver and bow at his back, and the bundled arrows clanged on the sky behind as he rocked in anger. Descending like night itself, apart from the ships, he halted and let fly, and the bowstring slammed as the silver bow sprang, rolling in thunder away. Pack animals were his first target, and dogs, but soldiers, too, soon felt transfixing pain. From his hard shots and pyres burned night and day. 9 days the arrows of God came down broadside upon the army. On the 10th, Achilleus called all ranks to the assembly. Hera, whose arms are white as ivory, moved him to it, as she took pity on the Danaans dying. All being mustered, all in place and quiet, Achilleus, fast in battle as a lion, rose and said. Okay, so not to interrupt the man himself here, but clearly the Greeks have fucked around and found out. But do take some time to appreciate the really nice day and night imagery we have. The Greek starts this passage with calling the vengeful god Poibos Apollon, which means bright or radiant, shining Apollo. But his arrows come down like the night. This plague then continues for several days and nights. And for context, so the sort of battles described in the Iliad do typically cease at night. It seems to be that in wars like this, men had sort of an understanding that you don't fight, through the night. Similarly to how we talked about death and indiscriminate slaying being avoided if possible, war, as it is described in the Iliad at least, is understood to have sort of a gentlemanly set of rules that prevents like a population ruining event. So this plague continuing day and night is not just like a tired phrase, but a description of something that is beyond the veracity of typical warfare. And Achilles seeks to organize men to find some solution to their predicament. He is moved to do so by Hera, who is maybe here an embodiment of divine mercy. She's also, as a character, is sort of always supports the Greeks. The epithet used for her is a pretty common one, white-armed, which refers to the fair complexion that gets maintained in upper-class women, since they don't have to work outside, basically. But for me, I do feel like there's a bit of added relevance with that day-night imagery. On this 10th day after the long assault, white-armed Hera comes in. That the brightness there is almost like a metaphorical day after their prolonged night. Anyways, Achilles says, Agamemnon, now I take it, the siege is broken, we are going to sail, and even so may not leave death behind. If war spares anyone, disease will take him. We might, though, ask some priest or some diviner, even some fellow good at dreams, for dreams come down from Zeus as well. Why all this anger of the god Apollo? Has he some quarrel with us for a failure? In vows or hecatombs? Would mutton burned or smoking goat flesh make him lift the plague? So Achilles is just trying to figure out, why all of this is happening. Achilles is very much a man of action rather than thought. He's using his capacity as a leader in sort of a Joe Rogan-esque way of throwing that question out when he's got everybody gathered to any men of thought who may have some insight. And a vocabulary note: the hecatombs. That's to make a hecatomb is like to make a sacrifice of like 100 cattle to a god. And also, just so we're on the same page, with these animal sacrifices, at least with the Greeks, it's not like 100% of the animal is being burnt or offered up. It's like a portion that is burned, typically a less edible part of the animal. So they get the animals, slay them, cook them, have a big feast, and then they'll take some like thigh bones or whatever in fat, and that's what they burn, sending to the gods. It's not that all of the meat is wasted or anything. Putting the question down, he sat, and Calchas Thestorides came forward, wisest by far of all who scanned the flight of birds. He knew what was, what had been, what would be. Calchas, who brought Achaea's ships to Ilion, by the diviner's gift Apollo gave him. Now for their benefit he said, Achilleus, dear to Zeus, it is on me you call, to tell you why the archer god is angry. Well, I can tell you. Are you listening? Swear by heaven that you will back me and defend me, because I fear my answer will enrage a man with power in Argos, one whose word Achaean troops obey. A great man in his rage is formidable. For underlings, though he may keep it down, he cherishes the burning in his belly until a reckoning day. Think well if you will save me. I think many of us have been in those shoes, having to say something right and true about someone when it may hold some consequences. The speaker, Calchas, has expertise in watching the flight of birds. And as funny as that is to say nowadays, this was a very important skill to have in the ancient world. Beyond superstition, when sailing, as our heroes are, over the Aegean, the flight patterns of birds can be very helpful for sailors to find their way. And there was also, more relevant here, a very serious art of divination, the ornithomancy, or observing the flight of birds to interpret omens or divine will. And that was something that the faithful of old put a lot of stock in. So Calchas is understood to be a credible authority for the question of why a god would be angry. Also, though Calchas is referring to Agamemnon, who would be offended by his words, don't let some of this foreshadowing be lost on you. He is saying to Achilles, a great man in his rage is formidable for underlings. Will be kind of funny later. And Achilles responds to him, courage, tell what you know, what you have light to know. I swear by Apollo, the Lord God to whom you pray when you uncover truth. Never while I draw breath, while I have eyes to see, shall any man upon this beachhead dare lay hand upon you, not one of all the army, not Agamemnon, if he is who you mean, though he is first in rank of all Achaeans. So Achilles agrees to stand by Calchas and defend his truth against consequence. He also boldly names Agamemnon, whom Calchas only hinted at, which may imply, as is the case, that Achilles is already somewhat disposed against Agamemnon, the first among Achaeans. The diviner then took heart and said, "No failure in hecatombs or vows is held against us. It is the man of prayer whom Agamemnon has treated with contempt. He kept his daughter, spurned his gifts for that man's sake. The archer visited grief upon us and will again. Relieve the Danaans of this plague he will not, until the girl who turns the eyes of men shall be restored to her own father, freely, with no demand for ransom, and until we offer up a hecatomb at Chrysae. Then only we can calm him and persuade him." He finished and sat down. The son of Atreus, ruler of the great plain, Agamemnon, rose, furious. Round his heart resentment welled, and his eyes shone like licking fire. Then, with a long and boding look at Calchas, he growled at him, "You visionary of hell! Never have I had fair play in your forecasts. Calamity is all you care about or see, no happy portents, and you bring to pass nothing agreeable. Here you stand again before the army, giving it out as an oracle. The archer made them suffer because of me. Because I would not take the gifts and let Chryseis go. I'd have her mine at home." So an interruption here. To keep a few names straight, we have the place called Chrysae, or Chrysae, Chrysae. The man, the priest to Apollo, is called Chryses, with an S. And his daughter is Chryseis. Chryseis, by the way, just means the daughter of Chryses. Her first name is not given. So the diviner, Calchas, has purported the cause of the plague to be Agamemnon's captivity of Chryseis. Agamemnon then stands up angrily against Calchas and accuses him of only seeing calamity, and of treating Agamemnon unfairly in his divination. Now we are to assume that Calchas is giving a fair interpretation of events, but Agamemnon's claims are not wholly unfound, at least to his own perspective. The audience of the Iliad is assumed to already be familiar with other stories of the Trojan War, and the Iliad is not a full telling of the events of the Trojan War. I think I failed to say it up to now, but this is the 10th year of the Trojan War that the Iliad starts in. So many things have already happened, and one of these things that have happened involved the very three characters we're hearing from now. Without going too much into it, Calchas had already been tasked with an interpretation of divine wrath, and that earlier prediction was that punishment against the Greeks from the goddess Artemis would not relent until the sacrifice of a woman named Iphigenia. And Iphigenia just happened to be the daughter of Agamemnon, so he understandably has a sore spot for Calchas's prophesying at his expense. Agamemnon was, however, not entirely a victim, as Artemis's wrath upon the Greeks was only due to Agamemnon poaching a sacred stag of the goddess. So we have at present sort of a reflection of past events. In fact, even Achilles was involved in that one too. The transportation of Iphigenia to the place of sacrifice was under the pretext that she was going to marry Achilles. So all three men involved in this argument have sort of been in this same situation before. And this is important when considering their reactions and reasoning. Agamemnon continues, defending his choice thus far and keeping Chryseis. "Yes, if you like, I rate her higher than Clytemnestra, my own wife. She loses nothing by comparison, in beauty or womanhood, and mind or skill. For all that, I am willing now to yield her. If it is best, I want the army saved, and not destroyed. You must prepare, however, a prize of honor for me, and at once, that I may not be left without my portion. I, of all Argives, it is not fitting so. While every man of you looks on, my girl goes elsewhere." Prince Achilleus answered him, "Lord Marshal, most insatiate of men, how can the army make you a new gift? Where is our store of booty? Can you see it? Everything plundered from the towns has been distributed. Should troops turn all that in? Just let the girl go, in the god's name now. We'll make it up to you twice over, 3 times over. On that day Zeus gives us leave to plunder Troy behind her rings of stone. Agamemnon answered, Not that way will I be gullied, brave as you are, Achilles. Take me in, would you? Try to get around me. What do you really ask? That you may keep your own winnings? I am to give up mine? And sit here wanting her? Oh no. The army will award a prize to me, and they make sure that it measures up, or if they do not, I will take a girl myself. Your own, or Aias's, or Odysseus's prize. Take her, yes, to keep. The man I visit may choke with rage. Well, let him. But this, I say, we can decide on later. Look to it now. We launch on the great sea a well-found ship, and get her mannered with oarsmen. Load her with sacrificial beasts, and put aboard Chryseis and her loveliness, my deputy Aias, Idomeneus, or Prince Odysseus. Or you, Achilles, fearsome as you are, will make the hecatomb and quiet the archer. So I think that by this point, even considering the background of sacrificing Pyganaea, it's hard to have a whole lot of sympathy for Agamemnon. He acknowledges that it is his insistence on keeping Chryseis that has plagued the Greeks, but still plays a victim in terms of wanting recompense for letting the girl go. And this, of course, coming after he already scorned the ransom gifts from Chryseis, which would have been fair compensation. But now he demands for his own folly to take from his fellow Greeks. And the Greeks he names are characters we'll see more of. They're all high-ranking leaders, leaders of troops and formidable warriors in their own rights. I'll describe them now because, again, readers of the story in ancient times would probably be familiar with them already. Aias, which may be written in yours as Ajax, is one of the mightiest Greek warriors, probably the largest and strongest among them, and second in battle only to Achilles. He is the bulwark of the Greeks, or to say in modern parlance, he's the tank build. Basically a big fucking guy with a big fucking shield. And he, along with Odysseus, are the two most important commanders aside from Agamemnon and Achilles. Now Odysseus is unlike Aias physically, being a very medium-built man, but he's still an invaluable asset to the Greeks. He's the most clever and cunning among them. And so often he devises the stealth tactics, such as his most famous contribution, the Trojan horse. He tends to serve in the Iliad as sort of a foil to the hot-headed and volatile Achilles, being always measured in his responses and careful in his actions. Idomeneus is another chief. He's a Cretan king, descendant of the legendary King Minos, and had at his command maybe the largest contingency of men. It's important to remember that the Greeks here, they're not like a centralized military power in any way. They are a sort of loose confederation of various kings with their own troops who are here working together. And this will be important in Achilles' response coming up. But Idomeneus had I think it was 80 ships full of men. Also important is that all of the chiefs named here are assumed to have taken a woman as a war prize from the campaign, which is what Agamemnon was driving at when he said he would want one of their prizes to relinquish his. And Achilles responds to that, "You thick-skinned, shameless, greedy fool, can any Achaean care for you or obey you after this on marches or in battle? As for myself, I came here to fight. I had no quarrel with Troy or Trojan spearmen. They never stole my cattle or my horses, never in the black farmland of Phthia ravaged my crops. How many miles there are of shadowy mountains, foaming seas between. No, we joined for you, you insolent boar, to please you, fighting for your brother's sake, and yours, to get revenge upon the Trojans. You overlook this, dog face, or don't care. And now in the end you threaten to take my girl, a prize I sweated for and soldiers gave me. Never have I had plunder like your own. From any Trojan stronghold battered down by the Achaeans, I have seen more action, hand to hand in those assaults than you have, but when the time for sharing comes, the greater share is always yours. Worn out with battle, I carry off some trifle to my ships. Well, this time I make sail for home. Better to take off now to my ships. Why linger, cheated of winnings, to make wealth for you? So Achilles, always quick to anger, is very offended at Agamemnon's threat to take his prize. As I think he's right to be. Of course, we do have to withhold some present-day morality when it comes to reading old works like this one. Obviously, no one should be considering women war prizes in the first place, but in the world they live in, I think it's fair to say that Achilles is more right than Agamemnon here. And Achilles' counter threat to leave, even if you think it may sound sort of princessy, is one that Agamemnon should be taking seriously. Again, the Greek forces are a confederation, not a top-down empire. Agamemnon doesn't have any real authority to make Achilles or the men under his command fight, and the loss of Achilles would be crippling for the Greek war effort. Achilles himself is the greatest of the Greeks, their finest warrior. And his men, the Myrmidons, are renowned troops. He initially landed at Troy with 2,500 of them. In their loyalty, they will follow him in or out of battle. What Achilles says about fighting for Agamemnon and his brother's sake is the cause of the Trojan War. The reason the fighting started in the first place was to reclaim Helen, the wife of Menelaus. That's Agamemnon's brother. And while he's obviously mad for personal reasons, I must say I do admire the sentiment expressed by Achilles when he muses on the purposelessness of his involvement in the war. Again, as for myself, when I came to fight, I had no quarrel with Troy or Trojan spearmen. They never stole my cattle or horses. Never in the black farmland of Phthia ravaged my crops. How many miles there are of shadowy mountains, foaming seas between. I guess I love that thought. Again, many times in ancient works you have to make moral concessions, but it is refreshing to see that one of the things, or that some of the things, are simply part of the human experience. The feeling Achilles has that he had no real reason to fight a distant war, and only took on loss for the gain in the interest of another, is something that echoes throughout all history, and is just as relevant in the past 100 years. It makes one think of sentiments around the Vietnam War in America, the Cold War, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He recognizes that the people he's been made to fight have wronged him in no way. He realizes how pointless the conflict is, given the vast sea that would peacefully separate them. It makes me think of how, us in America were fed anti-Muslim propaganda after 9/11, when it was our own government ordering people to die, or the black sentiment during the Vietnam War, rejecting government-produced xenophobia, the no Vietnamese ever called me nigger. And Achilles is by no means a champion of the people in any way, but it is harrowing to see him, or just to see these sort of eternal aspects of the human condition. He also calls Agamemnon dogface, which is pretty funny. And Agamemnon responds, "Desert, if that's the way the wind blows. Will I beg you to stay on my account? I will not. Others will honor me, and Zeus, who views the wide world most of all. No officer as hateful to my side as you are, none given to faction as to battle. Rugged as you are, I grant, by some god's favor. Sail then in your ships and lord it over your own battalion of Myrmidons. I do not give a curse for you, or for your anger, but here is a warning for you. Chryseis being required of me by Poebos Apollo, she will be sent back in a ship of mine, manned by my people. That done, I myself will call for Briseis in your hut, and take her. Flower of young girls that she is, your prize, to show you here and now who is the stronger, and make the next man sick at heart, if any think of claiming equal place with me." Agamemnon doubles down on that threat to take Achilles' girl, Briseis. Perhaps Achilles showed his hand too early when he expressed outrage at the notion of Agamemnon taking his prize. So Agamemnon meets Achilles' threat to leave coolly, promising no retaliation or curse, hitting him instead where it hurts the most, the taking of his bride. The son of Peleus was furious, and his heart within his shaggy breast was divided whether to draw his sword push the others aside and kill the son of Atreus, or to restrain himself and check his anger. While he was thus in two minds, and was drawing his mighty sword from its scabbard, Athena came down from heaven, for Hera had sent her in the love she bore to them both, and seized the son of Peleus by his yellow hair, visible to him alone. For of the others no man could see her. Achilles turned in amaze, and by the fire that flashed from her eyes, at once knew that she was Athena. "Why are you here?" said he, "daughter of aegis-bearing Zeus? To see the pride of Agamemnon, son of Atreus? Let me tell you, and it surely shall be, he shall pay for his insolence with his life." And Athena said, "I come from heaven, if you will hear me, to bid you stay your anger. Hera has sent me, who cares for both of you alike. Cease then this brawling, and do not draw your sword. Rail at him if you will, and your railing will not be vain. For I tell you, and it surely shall be, that you shall hereafter receive gifts 3 times as splendid by reason of this present insult. Hold, therefore, and obey." "Goddess," answered Achilles, "however angry a man may be, he must do as you two command him. This will be best, for the gods ever hear the prayers of him who has obeyed them." He stayed his hand on the silver hilt of his sword, and thrust it back into the scabbard as Athena bade him. She then went back to Olympus among the other gods, and to the house of aegis-bearing Zeus. So Achilles' impulse is to fight Agamemnon here and now, and he could easily take him, but we get some suppression of his id via divine intervention. Hera, who invariably favors the Greeks, sends Athena to talk him down. Athena is viewed as sort of a military strategist, and thus usually personifies the more meditated side of war: strategy, calculation, long-term thinking. It's this thought process that subdues Achilles' rage. He realizes that, since he is truly in the right here, there's no need to start a fight that would surely have great consequence, because Agamemnon has set out on a path of ruin anyway. So with these prospects, Achilles satisfies himself for now with just a little more shit-talking. "Sack of wine, you with your cur's eyes and antelope heart. You've never had the kidney to buckle on armor among the troops or make a sortie with picked men. Oh no, that way death might lie. Safer, by God, in the middle of the army, is it not, to commandeer the prize of any man who stands up to you, leech, commander of trash? If not, I swear you could never abuse one soldier more. But here's what I say, my oath upon it. By this great staff, look, leaf or shoot, it cannot sprout again. Once lopped away from the log it left behind in the timbered hills, it cannot flower, peeled of bark and leaves. Instead, Achaean officers in council take it in hand by turns when they observe, by the will of Zeus, do order in debate. Let this be what I swear by then. I swear a day will come when every Achaean soldier will groan to have Achilles back. That day you shall no more prevail on me than this dry wood shall flourish. Driven though you are, and though 1,000 men perish before the killer Hector, you will eat your heart out, raging with remorse from this dishonor, done to you by the bravest of Achaeans. He hurled the staff studded with golden nails before him on the ground, then sat down, and fury filled Agamemnon, looking across at him. So the imagery of the dry wood and analogizing its inability to sprout with his own refusal to fight when Agamemnon may change his mind is great imagery. But let me underscore, just to be sure, what this scepter means. So the scepter is a sort of relic understood to be once owned by Zeus himself, and then given to kings as a way to approve of their authority over men. It thus means a divine right to rule. But the handling of the scepter is not how you might imagine like a medieval king who holds it constantly and owns it. Rather, Agamemnon is not the only person to hold the scepter, or in fact really its owner. It's seen as a sort of a gift from Zeus that affirms lordship. And the practice, for instance, here with these men, who were all of high rank and kings in their own right, is that they sort of pass the scepter between hands when speaking about important matters like this. and not so much as like a talking stick, but rather it's just a show of mutual respect that is had between these men. And when Agamemnon hands the scepter to one of his chiefs, they in turn respect his authority by respectfully passing it back to him, showing their loyalty and trust, that he is the rightful leader. Which, of course, Achilles emphatically did not do. He drops the scepter to the ground. He doesn't break it or try to deface it in any way. Probably to do so would be blasphemous. Achilles' qualm is not with Zeus, but with Agamemnon. And by not returning him the symbol of loyalty and rightful kingship, he displays to Agamemnon and to all the Greeks that he no longer respects Agamemnon's authority. And visually, Agamemnon fails as a king and leader by losing the approval of his subject. Achilles has resolved to insult Agamemnon rather than fight him. But now Agamemnon is the one, feeling enraged and volatile. It would be a good time for a third party to come in and diffuse the tension. Then uprose smooth-tongued Nestor, the facile speaker of the Pylians. And the words fell from his lips sweeter than honey. 2 generations of men born and bred in Pylos had passed away under his rule, and he was now reigning over the third. With all sincerity and goodwill, therefore, he addressed them thus. Of a truth, he said, a great sorrow has befallen the Achaean land. Surely Priam with his sons would rejoice, and the Trojans be glad at heart if they could hear this quarrel between you two, who are so excellent in fight and counsel. I am older than either of you, therefore be guided by me. Moreover, I have been the familiar friend of many men even greater than you are, and they did not disregard my counsels. Never again can I behold such men as Pirithous and Dryas, shepherd of his people, or as Aeneas, Exadius, godlike, Polyphemus, and Theseus, son of Aegeus, peer of the immortals. These were the mightiest men ever born upon this earth. Mightiest were they, and when they fought the fiercest tribes of mountain savages, they utterly overthrew them. I came from distant Pylos, and went about among them, for they would have me come, and I fought as it was in me to do. Not a man living now could withstand them, but they heard my words, and were persuaded by them. So be it also with yourselves, for this is the more excellent way. Therefore, Agamemnon, though you be strong, take not this girl away, for the sons of the Achaeans have already given her to Achilles. And you, Achilles, strive not further with the king, for no man who by the grace of Jove wields a scepter has like honor with Agamemnon. You are strong, and you have a goddess for your mother, but Agamemnon is stronger than you, for he has more people under him. Son of Atreus, check your anger. I implore you, end this quarrel with Achilles, who in the day of battle is a tower of strength to the Achaeans. Nestor is a really interesting character. He's an older man, like very old, and even in his age doesn't seem to shrink from war. We usually find him giving advice such as this. And due to his age and his particular eloquence, he and his admonition are revered by the Greeks. The efficacy of his advice we'll have to see, as we read on, but Homer himself seems to have sort of mixed feelings about the man. Homer will set up Nestor as wise and sagacious, but then undercut some of that reference just a bit by poking fun at how he gives advice. As older men are sometimes oft to do, before the meat of the advice comes through, he rambles on and gives a bit of a preamble detailing some of his own exploits from his heroic past. But I do think that regardless of Nestor's long-windedness and whether or not his advice always ends up being solid, we should focus on Homer's initial commendation of the man. Nestor eduepes, the sweet-speaking Nestor. And in this instance, his words really do flow melitos glukion, sweeter than honey. He manages to give fair treatment to both parties. He starts with the reminder that they're both on the same team, and their arguing cannibalizes that team. He says it's wrong for Agamemnon to take what it is Achilles', but also that it's wrong for Achilles to disrespect the Zeus-authorized leader. He reminds Agamemnon that he would not want to lose his greatest warrior, But he reminds that warrior that though he is stronger as an individual, his leader is stronger by the number of men under him. So let's see if that counsel hits home. Lord Agamemnon answered, "All you say is fairly said, sir. But this man's ambition, remember, is to lead, to lord over everyone, hold power over everyone, give orders to the rest of us. Well, one will never take his orders. If the gods who live forever made a spearman of him, have they put insults on his lips as well?" Archelaus interrupted, "What a poltroon, how lily-livered I should be called if I knuckled under to all you do or say. Give your commands to someone else, not me. And one more thing I have to tell you. I think it over. This time for the girl I will not wrangle in arms with you or anyone, though I am robbed of what was given me. But as for any other thing I have alongside my black ship, you shall not take it. Against my will. Try it. Hear this, everyone. That instant, your hot blood blackens my spear." Well, Nestor gave it a good go. They quarreled in this way, face to face, and then broke off the assembly by the ships. Archelaus made his way to the squadron in his quarters, Patroclus by his side with his companions. Agamemnon proceeded to launch a ship, assigned her 20 oarsmen, loaded beasts for sacrifice to the god, then set aboard Chryseis in her loveliness. The versatile Odysseus took the deck, and all oars manned. They pulled out on the drenching waves of sea. The troops meanwhile were ordered to police camp and did so, throwing refuse into the water. Then to Apollo, by the barren surf, they carried out full tally hecatombs, and the savor curled in the crooked smoke towards heaven. So Achilles and Agamemnon literally go on their separate ways. Achilles and his men go up to their quarters, withdrawing from the war effort. As he goes, Patroclus is right by his side, being, of course, his right-hand man and best friend. And as such, we'll be seeing a lot of Patroclus later. I'll go ahead and say now, there's a bit of contention with people as to whether or to what extent Achilles and Patroclus' relationship was erotic. My take is that it just doesn't matter. They may have gotten up to some intracrural activities, but if they did or didn't, it doesn't change that they're lifelong friends. They've experienced the joys of many feasts and the hardships of many battles together. And they have a very deep and loving bond. And I think that that can and ought to be respected for what it is. And I think it detracts a bit from the power of that bond to focus so heavily on just the sexual aspect of it. Kind of making a yaoi ship of them. And speaking of ships, Agamemnon sends one to return Chryseis, and gathers animals for a hecatomb sacrifice in an essay to make amends with the god Apollo. That was the day's work in the army. Agamemnon had kept his threat in mind, and now he acted, calling Eurybates and Talthybius his aides and criers. "Go along," he said, "both of you to the quarters of Achilles, and take his charming Briseis by the hand and bring her to me. And if he balks at giving her, I shall be there myself with men-at-arms and force to take her. All the more gall for him." So, ominously, he sent them on their way. And they, who had no stomach for it, went along the waste sea shingle toward the ships and shelters of the Myrmidons. Not far from his black ship and hut, they found the prince in the open, seated. And seeing those two come was cheerless to Achilles. Shamefast, pale with fear of him, they stood without a word. But he knew what they felt, and called out, "Peace to you, criers and couriers of Zeus and men. Come forward. Not one thing have I against you. Agamemnon is the man who sent you for Briseis. Here then, my lord Patroclus, bring out the girl and give her to these men. And let them both bear witness before the gods who live in bliss, as before men who die, a need for me arises to keep the rest from black defeat and ruin. Lost in folly, the man cannot think back or think ahead, how to come through a battle by the ships." Patroclus did the bidding of his friend, led from the hut Briseis in her beauty, and gave her to them. Back along the ships they took their way, and the girl went, loath to go. So Agamemnon has sent his heralds, Eurybates and Talthybius, to retrieve Briseis, Achilles' girl. I'm not sure if it's known Whether this is the same or a different Eurybates from the Odyssey, who is the favorite kind of squire of Odysseus, could be or not. But Talthubios is a recurring character from some Greek stories. He usually plays the messenger and often is not privileged with delivering the best news, as is the case here. Again, these are Agamemnon's heralds. So, I mean, they're not necessarily talking about peons here, but they are not the usual big dick swinging warrior kings we tend to focus on in the Iliad. So they're understandably a little nervous about this assignment. They saw that heated argument and have been sent by one belligerent to go knock on the door of the other, who also happens to be the fiercest warrior they've ever seen, with the charge of taking from him the thing he got so mad defending. But Achilles is a pretty cool guy, at least, to them here. And he reassures them by recognizing that they're just doing their job and that it's Agamemnon with whom he has the issue. He complies and sends Briseis with them. Also, I will note, and it's unfortunate that we're left to speculation on this, due to it being confined to a single word, but the word in question is aekus, unwilling, the word that describes Briseis' departure from Achilles. I'll remind that we are to withhold, presentism and the notion of how things ought to be, because, she is, after all, a human spoil of war. But one wonders what in the way of love there was between her and Achilles. Of course, and unfortunately, Homer doesn't give her a voice here, so we're left to wonder what Briseis' unwillingness looked like, and just what words she spoke, if only we could hear them. Maybe she did love Achilles, and maybe he loved her. I mean, he isn't the biggest fan of Agamemnon in any situation, but it was this taking of Briseis that ultimately made him disobey and disavow his commander in wartime. We can't know for sure, but I do like to think that there was something in the way of romance between them, even if it was born under much less than ideal circumstances. Okay, so this is going longer than I had initially thought. So I'm going to cap off here now, and next time we'll pick back up to Achilles weeping, feeling forlorn and cheated, and I guess literally, crying to his mother. He'll leverage that divine parentage that Agamemnon sort of criticized him for earlier. And anyone who's still with me at this point, I thank you, and I hope you'll join me next time. And if you have any, questions or clarifications on anything you need, or if you want to correct me somewhere, just leave a comment and I'll get back to you on it. Thanks.